Welcome to Courtroom Revelations. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, which country are you watching this video from? A gavel crashes down like a death sentence, echoing through the suffocating silence of the courtroom. For Judge Arthur Harrington, it's nothing more than routine. Another weekday, another ruling, another life sealed with a swing of his hand. Each verdict is just another tally in his long career of control. The man standing in the defendant, S. box, a black man named Malik, barely registers as human in Harrington's eyes. To him, Malik is just another statistic, another forgettable face he'll replace before lunchtime. Another name erased the moment the court adjourns. But what Harrington does to realize what he never even considers is that today he has made a catastrophic mistake. Because for the first time in his career, the man he believes is powerless is not who he appears to be. And the judge who thinks he controls fate is about to discover that he was never the one holding the strings. In this courtroom, the revelation is coming. He doesn't know that his courtroom is a crime scene, that his gavel is a weapon, and that the man he just framed is there. One man who can burn his entire corrupt world to the ground. The city of Oakhaven was a patient with a festering wound. On the surface it gleamed with civic pride and new development. But underneath the polished veneer, a rot had set in, poisoning everything it touched. At the heart of this decay was a name whispered in fear and reverence. Vincent the Viper Costello. He ran the city's criminal underworld with brutal efficiency. But his true power didn't come from the barrel of a gun. It came from the stroke of a pen and the slam of a gavel in courtroom 4B, presided over by the Honorable Judge Arthur Harrington. For 2 years, the FBI's Special Task Force on Organized Crime had been trying to build a case against Costello. They had informants, wiretaps, and mountains of circumstantial evidence. But every time they got close, the case would mysteriously fall apart in court. Witnesses would recant, evidence would be deemed inadmissible on a technicality, and key players would walk free. The leak wasn't in the police department. It was higher up. It was the judge. This is where Marcus Thorne came in. To the world, he was the newly appointed assistant director of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. A man known for his sharp mind, unyielding integrity, and a stare that could make seasoned criminals confess. But to the streets of Oakhaven, he was about to become Malik Jones, a man with no history, no connections, and a past, fabricated to look just desperate enough to be the perfect prey. The operation was audacious, bordering on insane. Marcus, a man who commanded hundreds of agents, was going undercover himself. We can't send an agent in, he'd argued in a heated briefing in Washington. Harrington and Costello's network is too deep. They can spot a cop a mile away. They need to believe they've found a random, powerless victim. It has to be someone they won't even think to look at twice. It has to be me. For 6 weeks, Marcus lived as Malik. He let his hair grow out, grew a scruffy beard, and traded his tailored suits for worn jeans and faded t-shirts. He worked odd jobs for cash, unloading trucks at the docks, washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner. He lived in a rundown apartment in the city's most neglected district, a place the city tried to forget. He was a ghost, a nobody. He learned the rhythms of the street, the language of the desperate. He saw firsthand how the law was applied differently on this side of the city. He watched officers Frank Miller and Kevin Davis, 2 patrolmen, known to be in Harrington's pocket, shake down local business owners and harass kids on the street with impunity. They were the judge's collectors, his street-level enforcers. The plan was simple. Get arrested. It had to be Miller and Davis, and it had to be for a crime serious enough to land him directly in Harrington's court without the possibility of a plea bargain. The moment came on a damp, chilly evening. Marcus was walking home from a shift, the meager cash he'd earned tucked into his pocket. A black and white cruiser screeched to a halt beside him, its lights painting the alley walls in strobing flashes of red and blue. Miller and Davis stepped out, their faces set in smug masks of authority. Well, what do we have here? Miller sneered, his eyes raking over Marcus. Walking a little fast there, buddy. You got somewhere to be. Marcus stayed in character, his shoulders slumping. Just heading home, officers. Let's see some ID, Davis demanded, his hand resting on his sidearm. Marcus produced the fake driver's license for Malik Jones. Davis snatched it. Malik Jones, you're a long way from nowhere, Malik. He handed it to Miller, who made a show of examining it under the flashlight. "What's in the bag?" Miller asked, nodding towards the small backpack Marcus was carrying. "Just my work clothes. We'll be the judge of that," Miller said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He ripped the bag from Marcus's shoulder and dumped its contents onto the wet pavement. A change of clothes, a half-eaten sandwich, a paperback book, and a small clear baggie containing a white powdery substance. Marcus' internal clock began to tick. The bait was planted. He looked at the baggie with practiced confusion and fear. "What is that?" "That's not mine. I've never seen that before." Davis laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That's what they all say. Looks like about 2 Rs of premium grade. Trouble to me, Frank." "My thoughts exactly," Miller agreed, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Malik Jones, you are under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." The cold steel clamped around Marcus's wrists. He didn't resist. He kept his eyes down, projecting the image of a terrified, defeated man. As they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, he caught a glimpse of Miller's phone. The officer was sending a text message, the screen's glow illuminating his triumphant smirk. The message was being sent to a burner phone, but Marcus knew its ultimate destination. It was a signal to the whole corrupt machine. The gears were now turning. The bait had been taken, and he was being dragged into the heart of the beast's lair. The central booking precinct was a cacophony of human misery. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, disinfectant, and despair. For Marcus Thorne, who had overseen operations that dismantled international crime syndicates, this was a different kind of front line. Here the enemy wasn't a cartel boss or a foreign spy. It was the slow, grinding indifference of a system designed to break you. As Malik Jones, he was processed like cattle. His fingerprints were taken, his photos snapped, his worn-out belt, shoelaces confiscated. He was stripped of his identity and given a number. Every interaction was designed to diminish him, to make him feel small and powerless. The officers behind the desk were dismissive. The guards were hostile, and the other men in the holding cell were a mixture of hardened criminals and terrified first-timers. Marcus, with his calm and watchful demeanor, fit somewhere in the middle. He observed everything, cataloging the cracks in the system, the casual cruelty, the shortcuts that were the lifeblood of corruption. After a long, sleepless night on a cold steel bench, he was brought for his arraignment. He was shuffled into a small windowless room to meet his court-appointed lawyer. A tired, ill-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes and a stack of files that seemed permanently attached to a hip entered and sat down opposite him. "Sarah Jenkins," she said, her voice weary but professional. "I'm your public defender. I've got about 10 minutes before they call your name, so let's make this quick. You're Malik Jones, picked up for possession with intent, 2 ounces of cocaine. Officers Miller and Davis, they're claiming it was in plain view in your bag. This is a serious charge, given the weight you're looking at. Mandatory minimums. The DA is not going to be lenient." She spoke in a rapid-fire monotone, the sound of someone who had given this same speech 100 times to 100 different men. Marcus looked at her, truly looked at her. He could see the spark of a fighter buried under layers of exhaustion and cynicism. "It wasn't mine," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "They planted it." Sarah let out a sigh, a sound heavy with disappointment. "Mr. Jones, everyone says that I have Dentistry's active cases right now. I need something more to work with than they planted it. Did they have cause to stop you? Did you say anything incriminating?" "They stopped me for walking too fast," Marcus replied evenly, "and I said nothing." Something in his tone, a lack of the usual panic or defensive anger, made Sarah pause. She looked at his file again, then back at him. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a stillness that was out of place. "Miller and Davis," she muttered to herself, "they have a reputation. Their reports are always a little too perfect." She sighed again. "Look, the bail hearing is next. The judge will be Arthur Harrington. He's tough, especially on drug charges. Don't say anything unless I tell you to. Just nod and look. Respectful. Our goal today is just to get through this. We'll talk more later. Shackled to a line of other men in orange jumpsuits, Marcus was led into courtroom 4B. It was an old wood-paneled room that tried to project an aura of solemnity and justice, but the dust motes, dancing in the shafts of light and the faint scent of decay, told a different story. And then he saw him, Judge Arthur. Harrington sat elevated on the bench, a black robe draped over his portly frame. He had a fid face, small, shrewd eyes, and a mouth that was permanently downturned in a look of stern disapproval. He moved with an air of absolute, unchallengeable authority. This was the man who held the city's fate in his hands. As the bail hearing for Malik Jones began, Harrington barely glanced at the file. The prosecutor quickly recited the charges. "Mr. Jones," Harrington said, his voice dripping with condescension as he finally looked down at Marcus. "Possession with intent to distribute, poisoning our streets. You people come into this city," and he stopped himself, catching the slightest flicker of a warning glance from a court clerk. "This court has zero tolerance for this kind of filth. Sarah Jenkins stood your honor. My client has no prior conviction. He has ties to the community, tenuous though they may be, and is not a flight risk. We request bail be set at a reasonable amount." Harrington scoffed, a small dismissive sound. "No priors that we know of. These transient individuals are a plague. They drift in, commit their crimes, and drift out. Reasonable bail. The only reasonable thing to do is ensure Mr. Jones remains where he can do no more harm." He looked directly at Marcus, his eyes cold and devoid of empathy. "Bail is denied. Remand to custody until trial." He banged his gavel, the sound echoing the finality of a slamming cell door. "Next case." As Marcus was led away by the bailiffs, his eyes met Harrington's for a fleeting second. Marcus showed nothing. His face, a mask of resignation, but inside a cold fire was burning. Harrington hadn't just denied him bail. He had revealed his hand, the use of "you people," the immediate assumption of guilt, the theatrical contempt. It was all part of the show. This wasn't justice, it was a performance. And Harrington was the star. Back in the holding cell, the weight of the system felt real, suffocating. Marcus knew his team was monitoring from a distance, that this was all part of the plan, but for the men around him this was not a plan. This was their life. He was inside the jaws of the machine and he could feel them beginning to grind. The Oak Haven County Detention Center was a world unto itself, a concrete and steel ecosystem that operated on its own brutal set of rules. For Marcus, it was the perfect listening post. Stripped of his rank and authority, he was just another inmate, invisible and underestimated. And in a place like this, being invisible was a superpower. He spent his days in a state of heightened awareness, his FBI training kicking into overdrive. He was a sponge, absorbing the prison's rhythm, its power dynamics, its currency of fear and favor. He listened to the guards' casual conversations, noting their biases and their blind spots. He watched the inmates, deciphering the coded language and silent signals that passed between them. His target was information on the pipeline between the street and the courtroom. He needed to find the link, the whispers that connected Costello, Harrington, and the beat cops like Miller and Davis. He found it in the unlikeliest of places, the prison library. It was a small, dusty room filled with tattered paperbacks, a sanctuary for those seeking a temporary escape. An old inmate named George Pops Washington ran the place. Pops had been inside for 20 years, a lifer who had seen it all. He was quiet, observant, and respected by every faction in the jail. Marcus started spending his allotted time in the library, not just to read, but to talk to Pops. He didn't push or pry. He asked about books, about life inside, and he listened. Pops, in turn, seemed to recognize something different in Malik. He saw a man who wasn't broken by the system, but was studying it. One afternoon, as Marcus was shelving books, he mentioned his case. "Got picked up by Miller and Davis," he said casually. "Planted a bag on me." Pops didn't even look up from the book he was repairing. "The welcoming committee," he rasped, his voice low. "That's what we call them. They bring fresh meat for the judge's grinder." "Harrington?" Marcus asked, keeping his Tone neutral. There's only one judge that matters for cases like ours, Pop said, finally meeting Marcus's gaze. His old eyes were sharp and knowing. Harrington runs his courtroom like a factory. Cops bring him the parts. He assembles the convictions and the product gets shipped out here. Everybody gets what they want. What does Harrington want? Pops gave a dry, humorless chuckle. What do all-powerful men want? More power and money. You don't get a house on Silver Lake and send your kids to Ivy League schools on a judge's salary. Not without a little help from your friends. Friends like Vincent Costello. Marcus ventured. The name a carefully placed stone dropped into a still pond. Pops's demeanor changed instantly. The friendly old librarian vanished, replaced by a weary inmate. You don't say that name in here, not unless you want to find a shiv in your ribs. Some walls have ears, and some of those ears report directly to the Viper. The conversation was over, but Marcus had what he needed: confirmation. The connection was real, and it was common knowledge within the prison walls. Harrington wasn't just a racist judge. He was a key cog in Costello's criminal enterprise. He kept the competition off the streets by fast-tracking convictions for rival dealers while ensuring Costello's own men got a pass. The frame-ups weren't random acts of prejudice. They were strategic moves to fill a quota and maintain a profitable partnership. Meanwhile, on the outside, Sarah Jenkins was finding her own reasons for suspicion. The perfect police report from Miller and Davis was starting to unravel under her scrutiny. The dashcam footage from their cruiser had a convenient and inexplicable 3-knot gap. Right around the time of the stop, the chain of custody for the evidence bag was sloppy with a signature that was barely legible. Driven by a gut feeling she couldn't shake, she started digging into old case files involving the two officers. A pattern emerged. Dozens of arrests over the past few years, all with similar fact patterns. A lone minority defendant, a traffic stop for a minor infraction, and the discovery of a significant quantity of drugs. And nearly every single one of those cases had been funneled into Judge Harrington's courtroom and ended in a swift conviction. She scheduled another meeting with Marek in the jail's visitation room. You were right, she said, her voice a low, intense whisper as she leaned over the table. This is bigger than just you, Miller, Davis, and Harrington. It's a system. I found at least 15 cases just like yours. But it's all circumstantial. It's a pattern of behavior, not hard proof of a conspiracy. What about the dashcam? Marcus asked. The official report says equipment malfunction. It's a dead end, she said. Frustration clear in her voice. They're covering for each other. The DA's office is accepting their reports without question. To win this, I need more than a pattern. I need something that blows this whole thing wide open. Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. He knew his team was gathering that proof, compiling financial records and tracking communications between Harrington and Costello's lieutenants. But Sarah didn't know that. She was fighting this battle alone, armed with nothing but her intellect and a growing sense of outrage. Just keep digging, Marcus told her. Question everything at trial. Make them lie on the stand. Make them contradict themselves. Every lie they tell is a thread. Pull on enough of them, and the whole tapestry will unravel. Sarah looked at her client, a man the world had labeled a drug dealer, but he spoke with the clarity and confidence of a strategist. For the first time, a flicker of hope ignited within her. This wasn't just another lost cause. This was a fight, and for some reason she felt like the man sitting across from her was ready for it. The day of the trial arrived with a heavy, oppressive stillness. Courtroom 4B was Judge Harrington's kingdom, and from the moment he swept in, his black robes billowing behind him, he made it clear who was in charge. He greeted the prosecuting attorney, a slick, ambitious man named Robert Vance, with a warm nod, and shot Sarah Jenkins a look of undisguised irritation. The jury selection was a masterclass in judicial manipulation. Harrington, with subtle cues and leading questions, steered the selection towards a panel that was predominantly white, older, and inclined to trust law enforcement without question. Sarah fought valiantly, using her limited challenges to weed out the most obvious biases, but she knew she was starting the trial on the back foot. Prosecutor Vance began his opening statement with theatrical confidence. He painted Malik Jones as a predator, a transient criminal who came to Oak Haven to peddle poison. He held up the evidence bag of cocaine, calling it a one-way ticket to misery and death, and lauded officers Miller and Davis as heroes protecting the community. When it was Sarah's turn, her approach was starkly different. "This case is about drugs," she began, her voice clear and steady, addressing the jury directly. "It's about the abuse of power. It's about a story crafted by two police officers that is too neat, too convenient, and too full of holes. The evidence will show you that my client, Malik Jones, is not a drug dealer. He is a victim." Harrington watched her, his fingers steepled, a look of profound boredom on his face. The prosecution's case was simple and on the surface devastating. Officer Frank Miller took the stand first. He was calm, professional, and radiated an aura of unimpeachable authority. He recounted the night of the arrest, describing how he and his partner had observed the defendant acting suspiciously and how a routine stop had led to the discovery of the narcotics. His testimony was a perfect recitation of his police report. Then came Sarah's cross-examination. "Officer Miller," she began, approaching the witness stand, "you stated you stopped my client for walking too fast. Can you please tell the court what the legal definition of walking too fast is?" Vance shot to his feet. "Objection. Relevance. Sustained," Harrington grunted. Without even looking at Sarah pivoted. "Officer, your report mentions a 3-minute gap in your dash cam recording due to an equipment malfunction. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am. The older units can be unreliable," Miller said smoothly. "How convenient," Sarah murmured, earning a sharp glare from the judge. "In your experience, officer, how often do these malfunctions occur?" "It happens from time to time." "And did this malfunction happen before or after you claimed to have found the drugs?" Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I believe it was around the same time. So, the single most crucial piece of objective evidence in this entire case is missing because of a perfectly timed technical glitch." Sarah pressed. "Objection. Argumentative." Vance shouted, sustained, "Miss Jenkins, move on or I will hold you in contempt." Harrington barked. The pattern continued with Officer Davis. He corroborated Miller's story perfectly, too perfectly. They used the same phrases, the same turns of speech, as if they had rehearsed from a script. Sarah poked and prodded, trying to find a crack in their story. But with Harrington blocking her at every turn, it was like trying to punch through a brick wall. Every objection from the prosecution was sustained. Every one of hers was overruled with a contemptuous wave of the hand. Marcus watched from the defendant's table, a silent, impassive observer. He was playing his part, looking downtrodden and hopeless. But inside he was a grandmaster watching a chess game, anticipating every move. He saw the jewelry, their faces already, hardening against him. He saw Sarah fighting with everything she had against a rigged game, and he saw Harrington, the smug puppet master, pulling all the strings. During a recess, Sarah sat beside him, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm sorry, Malik," she whispered, her voice strained. "He's not letting me lay a glove on them. The jury sees me as an obstructionist and them as heroes. We're losing." Marcus looked at her, his eyes holding a depth she couldn't comprehend. "You're doing exactly what you need to do," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're showing them the system. You're putting the corruption on the record. Don't stop fighting." His words, his unnerving calm, gave her a small jolt of renewed energy. She didn't understand this man, but she was starting to believe in him. The final act of the prosecution's case was the testimony of a forensic expert who confirmed the substance was cocaine and the amount was consistent with intent to distribute. It was a clinical, factual presentation that seemed to seal Malik Jones's fate. As the prosecution rested its case, a palpable sense of finality settled over the courtroom. Vance looked at the jury with a triumphant smile. Judge Harrington looked at his watch, eager to wrap things up. The system was working exactly as it was designed to. The frame was set. The evidence was presented, and the judge was ready to hammer the final nail in the coffin. Everyone in the room believed the outcome was a foregone conclusion. They were all wrong. The defense's case was painfully short, with no witnesses and no physical evidence to present all. Sarah Jenkins had was the testimony of her client, against her better judgment, but at his insistence. She called Malik Jones to the stand. Marcus walked to the witness box with a steady, deliberate gait that seemed at odds with his supposed station in life. He took the oath, his voice ringing with a surprising clarity in the hushed courtroom. Sarah led him through his testimony. He calmly and simply recounted his version of events, that he was walking home, that he was stopped without cause, and that the drugs were planted on him by the officers. He never raised his voice, never wavered in his account. Then came the cross-examination. Prosecutor Vance approached him like a wolf circling its prey. He sneered, he mocked, he twisted Marcus' words. "Mr. Jones," Vance began, dripping with sarcasm, "you're asking this jury to believe that two decorated police officers, two public servants, risked their careers and their freedom to frame a man with no job, no money, and no importance. What possible motive would they have? You'd have to ask them." Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering, "Oh, I will. I'll ask the jury to consider their sterling records against yours, Mr. Jones, or rather the lack of one. It's quite convenient, isn't it, that you just appeared in Oak Haven a few weeks ago. No history, no family, no connections, almost as if you have something to hide." Vance hammered away, but Marcus remained a rock. He answered every question with simple, direct honesty. His composure seemed to frustrate the prosecutor, who grew more and more aggressive, but in the end, it didn't matter. The jury had already made up their minds. After closing arguments, where Vance painted Marcus as a menace and Sarah made a passionate plea for them to see the reasonable doubt she saw so clearly, the jury filed out. They returned in less than 20 minutes. The speed of the verdict was a brutal omen. The foreman, a stern-faced man who had avoided eye contact with Marcus throughout the trial, handed a slip of paper to their bailiff. The bailiff passed it to Judge Harrington. Harrington read the verdict to himself first, and the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. He cleared his throat. "On the charge of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, we the jury find the defendant Malik Jones," he paused for dramatic effect, "guilty." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through one side of the courtroom. Sarah Jenkins slumped in her chair, the blow landing with physical force. She reached over and put a hand on Marcus's arm, a gesture of comfort. He, however, remained perfectly still. He simply watched Judge Harrington, his expression unreadable. "Sentencing will take place immediately," Harrington announced, eager to close the book on this case. "Mr. Jones, please rise." Marcus stood, his movements fluid and unhurried. Harrington leaned forward, relishing his moment of victory. He removed his glasses and looked down at Marcus with a look of utter contempt. "Malik Jones, this court has found you guilty of peddling filth on the streets of our fine city. Your crime is not merely a legal transgression. It is a moral one. You and people like you are a cancer that we must cut out. You prey on the weak and contribute nothing to society. You are, in short, a liar, a criminal, and a parasite." The judge's voice boomed with self-righteous fury. He was no longer a judge. He was a priest condemning a sinner. "Therefore, it is the sentence of this court," he continued, "that you will serve no less than 15 years in a state penitentiary with no possibility of parole for the first 10. This should serve as a message." It was at that moment that Marcus chose to act. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cutting through Harrington's tirade. It wasn't loud, but it had a quality of command that made everyone in the room, including the judge, fall silent. Harrington stared, stunned by the interruption. "The defendant will be silent. You have nothing more to say." "On the contrary, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "I believe I am entitled to make a statement before sentencing is finalized, and I have quite a lot to say." Sarah Jenkins looked at her client in a panic. What was he doing? He was only making things worse. She tried to pull him back, to whisper for him to stop, but he gently shook his head. Harrington, intrigued and arrogant, leaned back in his chair. A small, cruel smile played on his lips. "Very well, Mr. Jones. Let's hear it. Let's hear the pathetic excuses of a common criminal. The floor is yours. Amuse us." He gestured magnanimously. In his mind, he was giving the condemned man one last bit of rope to hang himself with. Marcus Thorne looked around the courtroom. He met the eyes of the jury, the prosecutor, and his own bewildered lawyer. Then his gaze settled on Judge Arthur Harrington, a predator locking eyes with its prey. The performance was over. The investigation was about to reach its stunning conclusion. The air in the courtroom crackled with a tension that no one could explain. They were all standing on the edge of a precipice, about to witness a fall they could never have imagined. "Thank you, Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice now devoid of the meekness he had feigned for weeks. It was a new voice, crisp, articulate, and imbued with an authority that seemed to come from a place far beyond the confines of a defendant's box. The entire courtroom leaned in, captivated by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "For the past 3 days," he continued, turning slightly to address the jury, "you have listened to a story, a well-rehearsed narrative about a man named Malik Jones, a supposed drug dealer. You heard the testimony of officers Miller and Davis, who painted themselves as vigilant protectors of this city." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. But as Miss Jenkins so eloquently argued, a story is all it is. And it's a story full of holes. Let's talk about that. 3-8 gap in the dash cam footage, for instance. An equipment malfunction, Officer Miller called it. Marcus' eyes found Officer Miller, who was standing near the prosecution's table looking smug. The equipment didn't malfunction, Officer Miller. It was manually deactivated at 9:14 p.m. and reactivated at 9:14 p.m., just long enough for Officer Davis to exit the vehicle, approach my side, and place the bag of narcotics, which had been in the cruiser's glove compartment since the beginning of your shift, into my backpack. Miller's face went pale. Prosecutor Vance shot to his feet. "Objection. The defendant is making wild, unsubstantiated claims." "I'm just getting started," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the objection like a scalpel. He turned his attention to the judge. "This frame up, Your Honor, was efficient, almost as efficient as the 15 other identical cases prosecuted in this very courtroom over the past 2 years, all involving minority defendants, all arrested by the same 2 officers, and all resulting in maximum sentences delivered by you." Harrington's face, once flid and arrogant, was now a mask of disbelief and rage. Belief restrained the defendant. His outburst is over, but the 2 bailiffs flanking Marcus hesitated, mesmerized by the scene unfolding. "I don't think you want to do that," Marcus said calmly. He looked past Harrington, towards the main doors at the back of the courtroom, "because this isn't an outburst. It's a debriefing." His eyes shifted to Vance. "And you, Mr. Vance, you were so curious about my motive, about why 2 decorated officers would frame an unimportant man. They did it because they were ordered to, just as you are ordered to prosecute certain cases with extreme prejudice while letting others slide." He then looked directly at Judge Harrington, his voice dropping to a steely, accusatory tone. "They do it for the same reason you do, Your Honor. For the money, for the monthly payments that are funneled from the accounts of Vincent Costello through 3 shell corporations and into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, account number 7349B41. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Sarah Jenkins stared at her client, her mind reeling. How could he possibly know these things? Judge Harrington slammed his gavel repeatedly, the sound now frantic and powerless. Contempt of court. "I order you to be silent. This is a circus." "No, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice rising to fill the chamber. "This is a federal sting operation, and you are its primary target." He reached into the pocket of his orange jumpsuit, an act that should have been impossible, and pulled out a small flat object. He held it up. It was a badge, an FBI badge. "My name is not Malik Jones," he declared, his voice resonating with the full force of the United States government. "I am Assistant Director Marcus Thorne of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A dozen agents in dark blue vests, emblazed with FBI, swarmed into the room, their movements precise and overwhelming. Leading them was a sharp-eyed woman who looked directly at Marcus. "Director Thorne," Agent Ramirez said, her voice crisp. "The perimeter is secure." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters in the gallery scrambled for their phones. The jury stared in stunned silence, their mouths agape. Officers Miller and Davis were frozen in place, their faces a portrait of pure terror as two agents moved to apprehend them. Prosecutor Vance staggered backward, collapsing into his chair as if his legs had given out. But Marcus Thorne had eyes for only one man. He looked at Judge Arthur Harrington, who was half standing, his face ashen, his gavel fallen from his trembling hand. The black robe that had been a symbol of his power now looked like a funeral shroud. "Arthur Harrington," Marcus said, his voice cold and final, "you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." Two federal agents ascended the steps to the bench. The secret space of the court, now a crime scene. They cuffed the sputtering, incoherent judge who just moments before had been the most powerful man in the room. Marcus Thorne stood tall in his orange jumpsuit, a symbol of the very system the judge had corrupted. He had walked into the lion's den disguised as a lamb, and he had brought the whole jungle down with him. The immediate aftermath of the reveal was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. As Judge Harrington, speechless and shaking, was led away in handcuffs from his own bench, the sanctity of courtroom 4B was irrevocably shattered. What was once a hall of justice had been exposed as a criminal's boardroom, and its CEO was now in federal custody. Officers Miller and Davis offered no resistance. The color had drained from their faces, replaced by the sick gray pallor of men who knew their lives were over. As they were read their rights, their eyes darted around frantically, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Their world of petty tyranny and guaranteed impunity had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Sarah Jenkins remained frozen in her seat beside the man she had known as Malik Jones. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, shock, and a dawning, brilliant sense of vindication. Every instinct she'd had about this case, every suspicion she'd harbored about the corruption in the system was not just true, it was the subject of the highest-level federal investigation. Marcus, Director Thorne, turned to her, the hardened mask of the undercover operative softened for a moment, and she saw the man beneath. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice now filled with a deep, genuine respect. "I apologize for the deception. It was a necessary part of the operation. You should know you're one of the finest public defenders I have ever had the privilege of observing. You fought for me when you had every reason not to. You upheld your oath, even in a court where it was meaningless." Sarah could only stammer. I don't understand. You let them convict you. We had to," Agent Ramirez explained, stepping forward. A conviction and sentencing by Judge Harrington was the final, undeniable act that tied the entire conspiracy together. It was the keystone. By framing Director Thorne, he sealed his own fate. The full scope of the operation, named Fallen Gavel, was revealed over the next few hours. While Marcus had been on the inside, his team had been working tirelessly on the outside. They had correlated his inside information with financial forensics, witness protection details, and advanced surveillance. They had built an ironclad case not just against the judge and his pet officers, but against the entire network. As Harrington was being processed at the federal building, other FBI teams were executing coordinated raids across Oak Haven. Vincent the Viper Costello was apprehended at his lavish estate, caught completely by surprise. His top lieutenants, several city officials on his payroll, and a handful of other corrupt police officers were rounded up simultaneously. The rot Marcus had felt in the city wasn't just being treated, it was being surgically removed. News cameras flocked to the courthouse, their broadcasts going national. The story was sensational. A sitting judge arrested in his own courtroom by an undercover FBI director he had just sentenced to prison. It was a tale of hubris and justice, so perfect it seemed scripted. For Marcus, the work was far from over. He was taken to a secure location where he finally shed the identity of Malik Jones. After a hot shower and a change into a crisp suit, he looked like himself again, but his eyes held the weight of what he had experienced. He had seen the justice system from the bottom up, and the sight was uglier than he could have imagined. He personally oversaw the initial interrogations. Miller and Davis folded within an hour, each one trying to betray the other to get a better deal. They confessed. Everything. The frame-ups, the kickbacks, the orders they took from Harrington. Harrington himself was a different story. He blustered and threatened, citing judicial immunity and accusing the FBI of a vendetta. But when Marcus walked into the interrogation room and laid out a series of satellite photos showing Harrington meeting with Costello on his private yacht, followed by bank statements from his offshore account with perfectly matching deposit dates, the judge's facade crumbled. He sat in stunned, defeated silence. The master of the universe was just a common criminal caught in an airtight trap. The reckoning had come to Oak Haven. The fall of Harrington and Costello sent shock waves through the city's political and legal establishment. It was a brutal, necessary purge, a cleansing fire that would allow for the possibility of true justice to finally take root. In the months that followed, the city of Oak Haven underwent a painful but necessary transformation. The federal trials of Arthur Harrington, Vincent Costello, and their co-conspirators became a public spectacle, laying bare the depth of the corruption that had plagued the city for years. Marcus Thorne did not testify in person but provided a detailed deposition that served as the backbone of the prosecution's case. The evidence was overwhelming: the financial records, the confessions of Miller and Davis, who both took plea deals for reduced sentences, and the testimony of dozens of other individuals who had been caught. In Harrington's web painted a damning picture. The former judge was a shadow of his former self. Stripped of his robes and his power, Arthur Harrington was just another punchy, middle-aged man in a suit, his arrogance replaced by a desperate, palpable fear. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in federal prison, a fate he had so callously meted out to countless innocent men. The irony was lost on no one. Vincent Costello, the Viper, was also convicted, his criminal empire dismantled for good. He would spend the rest of his days in a supermax facility, his power confined to a 6-9 FT cell. But for Marcus Thorne, the victory was about more than just putting bad men behind bars. It was about repairing the damage they had done. He spearheaded a joint task force with the Department of Justice to review every single case that had passed through Harrington's courtroom in the last decade. It was a monumental undertaking. One by one, wrongful convictions were overturned. Men who had lost years of their lives to Harrington's corrupt grinder were exonerated and released. Families were reunited. Lives were piece by piece put back together. George Pops Washington, the old prison librarian who had first confirmed Marcus's suspicions, was among those whose sentences were reviewed and eventually commuted. Sarah Jenkins became a local hero. Her tireless defense of Malik Jones was lauded as a testament to the principles of public defense. She was offered a senior position in a newly reformed public defender's office with the resources and staff to ensure that no one would face a rigged system alone ever again. She accepted, determined to be part of the solution. One crisp autumn evening, months after the trial, Marcus returned to Oak Haven not as an undercover operative but as the assistant director of the FBI. He met Sarah at a small cafe overlooking the city skyline. "Look at it," Sarah said, gesturing to the city lights. "It feels different now, cleaner, more hopeful." "Justice has a way of doing that," Marcus replied, a faint smile on his face. "It's a long road, but it's worth it. None of this would have been possible without people like you, Sarah, people who keep fighting even when the fight seems lost." "I had a feeling about you, she admitted with a laugh. "I told my colleagues I had a client who was either completely innocent or the most convincing sociopath I'd ever met." "I'm glad it was the former." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two warriors who had fought on the same side of a secret war. Marcus had gone into the darkness to expose it, but it was people like Sarah working every day in the trenches who would have to keep the light on. As he prepared to leave, Marcus looked out at the city once more. His work in Oak Haven was done. The wound had been cleansed. The patient was healing. It was a stark reminder that sometimes to fix a broken system you have to be willing to break it wide open. And sometimes the most powerful man in the room isn't the one in the judge's robes, but the one in the defendant's box, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver a verdict of his own. 2 years passed. The seasons in Oak Haven turned, washing the city with rain. and sun, and with them washing away the most visible stains of its corrupt past. The sensational trials of Judge Harrington and the Costello Syndicate faded from the national headlines into local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to new recruits at the police academy, and a case study for law students. But for the people whose lives were directly touched by the conspiracy, the changes were not legendary. They were real, tangible, and woven into the fabric of their daily existence. Sarah Jenkins now ran the Oakhaven Public Defender's Office. The cramped, underfunded warren of cubicles had been replaced by a modern, spacious office in a new municipal building. The change was more than cosmetic. Her budget had been tripled by a reform-minded city council, allowing her to hire bright, dedicated young lawyers, investigators, and social workers. The office, once a place of managed despair, now hummed with a vibrant, determined energy. One afternoon, she watched a young lawyer from her team, Maria Sanchez, returned from court, her face glowing with triumph. "We won," Maria announced to the office. A round of applause breaking out. Motion to suppress granted. The judge found the traffic stop had no probable cause. Case dismissed. Sarah smiled. The judge in that courtroom was a new appointee, a stern but scrupulously fair woman who followed the letter of the law. 2 years ago, a motion like that would have been laughed out of Harrington's court. Today it was the standard. The system was slowly, painstakingly healing itself. "That's great work, Maria," Sarah said. "What did I tell you? You attack the procedure. You make them justify every step. It's just I can't imagine what it was like for you," Maria said, her voice full of awe, arguing in front of him. It was a different world, Sarah admitted, a distant look in her eyes. "But it's a world that doesn't exist anymore. Let's make sure it never comes back." Miles away in the desolate landscape of ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison, former Judge Arthur Harrington was living in that different world here. There were no black robes, no elevated bench, no symbols of power. There was only a concrete box and the crushing weight of endless identical days. His name was gone, replaced by inmate number 7928, D. Dadvolv. He was no longer a weaver of fates. He was a ghost in the machine he had once so gleefully operated. The other inmates, a collection of the nation's most dangerous criminals, regarded him with a particular kind of contempt. He wasn't a gangster or a kingpin. He was a hypocrite, a man who had wielded the law like a weapon only to be felled by it himself. One day in the prison yard, during his 1 hour of allotted recreation, a wiry inmate with cold, dead eyes approached him. "Harrington Wright," the inmate hissed, his voice a low threat. Harrington, whose spirit had been eroded to a nub of perpetual fear, flinched. "I don't know you. You should. You sent me up 15 years for a possession charge." Cops were Miller and Davis. The inmates, lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Funny how things work out. I get out in 3 years. On that appeal your FBI friend started. But you're never leaving. Every day you're in here. I want you to remember the faces of the men you sent here, because now you're just one of us." The inmate walked away, leaving Harrington trembling, not from the threat of violence, but from the chillingly perfect karma of his new reality. He was trapped in the very hell he had created for others, stripped of his name, his power, and his future. Back in Washington, D.C., in his quiet, orderly office at FBI headquarters, Assistant Director Marcus Thorne reviewed the latest crime statistics from Oakhaven. Violent crime was down, 18%. Public trust in law enforcement was up for the first time in a decade. The reforms were holding. Operation Fallen Gavel had become a model for combating systemic corruption. Marcus had been promoted, given more oversight, and was now tasked with creating similar internal affairs units in other troubled cities. The work was demanding, bureaucratic, and a world away from the grit of his undercover assignment. Yet he found a deep satisfaction in it. Pinned to a corkboard behind his desk amidst charts and official memos was a small newspaper clipping from the Oakhaven Gazette. It was a photo of Sarah Jenkins cutting the ribbon on her new office. She had sent it to him with a simple handwritten note. "Look what you started." He sometimes thought about Malik Jones, the ghost he had been for 6 weeks. He remembered the cold of the cell, the taste of prison food, the suffocating feeling of powerlessness. It was a scar on his soul, a memory he would carry forever. But it was also his greatest strength. It gave him a perspective that no other director in the Bureau possessed. He knew what the system felt like from the bottom, and he would spend the rest of his career fighting to fix it from the top. The city of Oakhaven was healing, but the scars remained. They were a reminder of how easily justice could be perverted, but also a testament to the fact that no system is so broken that it cannot be reclaimed by the brave and the just. The fall of one corrupt judge had not solved all the world's problems, but for one city it had allowed a new dawn to break. The story of Marcus Thorne and Judge Harrington is a powerful reminder that the scales of justice can be tipped by corruption, but they can always be set right by courage and truth. It shows that no one is above the law, and that integrity can be found in the most unexpected places, from the highest ranks of the FBI to the overworked office of a public defender. Karma in this story wasn't just a concept. It was a federal task force, and its arrival was devastating for those who thought they were untouchable. If this story of justice served and corruption crushed resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see that the good guys can still win. And subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of karma and justice in action. Let us know in the comments what you thought about Director Thorne's audacious